he's requesting for an additional committee member.
Joe McCulca, Stony Brook, Chairman of the Advisory Committee with Gateway. Thank you, Madam Chairman, for moving me up. This should only take a moment.
Yeah.
We've been functioning one member short for a period of time, over a year, I believe. And we do have I think, a competent individual that is willing to join the committee. We've given some information and given her your name. I think it's Angela Sullivan, as I recall.
It's correct.
And that I'd like to recommend that the board approve her for addition to the advisory committee. That's simple.
Do I have any questions, Mr. McCullough? Do I have a motion?
Also move, but I do have one question.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion and a second. Here's your question.
Joe, is Angela here today so we can meet her?
Unfortunately, apparently, she told me there was a potential conflict, and she was going to do everything she can to get here today, and apparently she was not able to.
Will you tell her we'd like to meet her
I
when
certainly
possible?
will. I'm going to try to bring her down and get her familiar with the whole process down here.
Thank you. Call the question.
Okay, all those in favor of Angela Sullivan being added to the Stony Brook Advisory Committee, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. You have a new member.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
All right, now back to, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Tinkle had one more thing that he wanted to bring up to the district
Yeah,
council.
it's a point of clarification, and I think there's some confusion, and I want to make sure, and maybe I'm the one that's confused. A couple of weeks ago, we had Scott Connell show up on behalf of Worthington, and we, I believe, consented to dividing the Worthington into two areas, as I recall. I do not recall any discussion that we were accepting a transfer of ponds and wetlands at that time. We agreed to the concept. In my opinion, they've got to go through a procedure of checks and balances, which it means we check the ponds and verify that the ponds are done right. Now, that's kind of complicated because of the fact that somebody years ago decided for us to take them over and operate and maintain them. But the wetlands are a different story. Those were under a 5-year deal. I believe the 5-year period expired, and it's again what I talked about earlier today. We go into this no man's land, and nobody's operating and maintaining them. My only point is that before we just carte blanche accept those wetlands and conservation areas in this Worthington transfer area, that staff understands, we haven't accepted it yet. Go out, check it, make sure there's no exotics or anything else in there, and that those wetlands meet our standards. Then let them come in for a transfer through the normal channels of filling out the forms that we have to sign and accept to South Florida that we accepted them. I'm tired of accepting this stuff that just doesn't meet. And then we get stuck with the compliance issues.
So again, I'll leave this to Chris and staff to, check into this, be aware of it, and find out where we stand.
Forms are on my desk and they are not executed.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Thank you, that's all I
right.
have for Tony.
And with that,
Okay.
district,
Yeah, and I guess just for clarification, my understanding was that the approval was, I understand if they're not executed, but I understood that was the action that was requested at the last meeting. And I thought the board had approved it as part of that.
My understanding is we were accepting the splitting of those two areas, not the accepting of the transfer of wetlands that we haven't even inspected. Why would we ever do that?
I
My
voted
understanding
no,
was-
so I'm not guilty.
Yeah, my understanding, once again, I'm just saying, my understanding was, it was the latter to accept the transfer. Yeah, I believe that was the agenda, and that's why the transfer
If
form
that
was. What?
wetland is fine and it meets all of our standards, I have no problem. I just do not want any more blanket acceptances.
Oh, no, I understand, but my recollection was, in the agenda packet was the transfer form. I think it addressed that was the purpose of it.
Well, the way I got it from Scott is he was asking for the splitting of these two properties, which I had no problem with that.
That had already occurred.
If they're asking for, if we need a motion then to deny accepting it, I'll make that motion.
No. I'm not-
Subject to checking it.
No, what I'm saying is, I think we need to have some discussion for clarity. Again, I'm not defending, I'm
It
just
may
saying.
be a moot point, but Tony, that's what happens in this place. We didn't have anybody from staff stand up and categorically tell us that you're accepting something that meets our standards. That's what's happened here. It just goes along, everybody's happy, and then all of a sudden we get a nice nastyogram from South Florida or Lee County telling us we're in non-compliance and we're spending 20 million bucks. And my deal is, that can't keep going.
So, we'll have staff
Have
look
staff
into
check it.
that. Yeah, please, before you sign off on anything.
And if it's good,
Make
I'm
sure.
happy.
Okay.
Well, I guess the question is, to avoid any confusion, I would suggest that staff not make that decision, that even if it is good, that it come back to the board so we have that public record. But once again, I'm not defending the developer, my recollection as to what occurred, that was the purpose of the action requested.
Can
At
you
the-
bring that back to the board at the next meeting, just for clarification purposes? Thank you.
And again, if it's clean, I'm fine.
And with that, we'll move to district management reports. District manager.
And I'll just briefly summarize and then follow with Kenny Hall with the utility manager report, and then Mike Tisch will be doing the public works report. Lake restoration project, for the most part, is done. There's some punch items, some sod issues, and a few minor things. The contractors have been unable to work most of the last 2 weeks because the water levels are so high. I'm in touch with them daily. As they drop, they will be back to make those repairs and washouts. And that's why the cones and the portalet are still up in the boat, up on Griffin Drive, because they're still working and have repair work to do. The only big concerns have is when the water drops, the condition of the sod.
It's gonna
So
be dead.
we'll be following that. I made a mention.
just say it.
Yeah, we're updating the district's HR manual. We'll also be issuing the first part of next week, a request for proposal for rates and fees for the utility operations and also the assessment methodology. We will put that out, and we will bring back the responses to the board for review and approval. Select the top 3 rated firms, then enter a negotiation with number 1. Then if that doesn't work, you go to number 2 and number 3, but there'll be a presentation to the board on both. State Revolving Loan Fund is having a workshop sponsored by Engineering Society on the 23rd and 24th, and I plan to attend that unless Mr. Tinkle would like to go in my place. And on August 11th, we'll have representatives from the school board here Friday, 9 a.m. To start preliminary planning and discussions on the new high school.
When is that?
August 11th at 9 a.m. And Kathy has volunteered to attend. Mr. Tinkle, if you'd like to attend, they'll just have to notice the meeting.
And take minutes, as you.
And that'll be right here.
But we have some engineering items to talk to them about for sure.
Okay? And that's
Yes.
all I have unless there's any questions.
Our engineer's gonna be at that meeting, correct? Okay.
Okay. Kenny, you want to address utilities?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Kenny Hall, Utility Manager. We had our irrigation shut down. We installed our new OS and Y valves. We had 10 of them. We also installed 3 new check valves. So all of our check valves, all of our OS-Y valves on our irrigation system have been done. And another addition to the work that was done, we cut away from our old hydrodramatic tank, flanged it off. So that was done at the last day of the repair. The repair only took 2 days. We pressure tested for another day, and the system is running as it was. What these OSY valves do for us is we can now isolate individual pumps or multiple pumps or whatever way we want to do it without having to shut the entire system down. So if we lose a pump, we have a real issue with one pump, as opposed we can just isolate that pump altogether. And the new check valves have all gone in. The total cost for this was $28,850, and the cost of the check valves was $12,450. And once again, I've tested the system. We've run multiple pressure tests. We had our standard leaks after the installs were done. They came right back out and done it. We did it over a 3-day period, and as of now, everything is as it was and much better. We did gain another 2% on the low flow for the jockey pump. That was the only, that was our kind of a surprise. I didn't think it would have that much of a difference on it, but it did, so. And then we've got, we had a meeting with Lennar about what was going on out in Pelican Reserve.
Your name keeps coming up, Lenore.
And about what we were finding.
Define we to make sure that I
Yeah.
wasn't involved.
No.
Myself, Chris, and Leslie, and Tim and Scott from Lenore, we all sat down and had a conversation about what was going on with all of our equipment, water theft. We reviewed everything, what was going on. We all got on the same page. One of the things that we took away was that we also asked them if there was anything we could do. What was, if they were having any problems or issues on our side that we could do to improve that. We told them what was going on with we were finding straight piping and such, and that we were gonna take action. They jumped right on with us. They had to sit down with all of their contractors and let them know that we were gonna be out there every single day, looking at everything, and if we find something, especially on the other side of our check valves, and ahead of the backflow valve, that we would take, that was very serious, and we would take action right away. And they were very responsive. They have everything in place on their side, so it was actually a pretty good meeting. And we also, with our equipment, when we were putting in all the new equipment, we're putting the MIUs in at the time of when it was requested, which it's just sitting there, the contractors are in there, so we've just completely stopped installing our equipment. We're just installing just the meter. And if the construction's not done by the time the billing cycle's up, we'll go out there and read it ourselves. Once all the construction's gone, we've got turf on the ground, or a resident, we'll go out and install our equipment at that time. Because we're finding lids open, they're breaking them, I mean, it's just everyday run-of-the-mill kind of stuff. So to avoid that, we're just not gonna install any of our software. It would just be a straight meter. They'll go out and read it as needed. And then we had the repairs on the Prado and the Pistoria lift stations at Pelican Reserve. We found 2 big deficiencies there before we would accept it. They came out, repaired it. They did the master in Prado and the Pistoia station. We had some serious construction issues with that. And they came out and repaired it. We've gone back out and looked over it. I found 2 more minor things. They came right back out and fixed that. So we are squared away with the lift station problems that we had on the punch list.
Question with the water theft.
Mhm.
Did you figure out how that was happening? Who
Straight
was
piping.
doing it?
You'll find straight piping.
So
And-
in other words, they rigged it.
Right, the
Kentucky
contract,
meter.
a
Yeah.
subcontractor will come in and they'll need water, and they don't have a meter, and they need it right then and there. They'll stick a PVC pipe right into the, turn it on, and use the water. That's going through the backflow preventer. So I mean, that's not, that's an issue, a real issue. But it's, if you find a tap in front of that backflow, that's a real serious issue.
Okay.
We made that very clear to them, and they're very receptive. They even had, I believe, 2 meetings with all of their subcontractors and talked to them and told them that we are out there every day. This will not be tolerated. We are putting our foot down, basically. This is gonna stop.
Thank
So
you.
what I also did was I had instructed our staff to go out there and we locked out every meter that's not hooked up. So there's a lock on it. So if they go into there and break that lock, they would have to break our lock to get into any meter in Pelican Reserve, Hampton Park, the Parcel J, and Timber, I think it's Timber Ridge right here. They've been locked out.
Thank you. Mr. Guy?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Kenny, I have on good authority that at that construction site, there have been thefts of air conditioners and pool heaters and other expensive gear, for lack of a better word. Do we have anything out there that is terribly expensive that we are gonna hope doesn't get theft, doesn't get stolen?
Standby generator.
We have a standby generator that we put out there actually yesterday. We staged it out at the Prado station, the smaller of the 2 in Prado.
Did you check it today?
Yeah.
It's in my backyard.
My boss clearly instructed me to make sure that would not be, there would be no issue with that being, turn up missing.
Take the
And they would have to, I just took the hitch off.
Take
So
the
they're gonna have to come up
hitch.
there and lift it up, and it would be quite a process for them to take that generator.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Pump stations, you were talking about the 2 settlement issues
Yes.
that they got fixed. Great.
Yes.
The other one is that, are you and Chris working on anything I think we have a lot of value or potential value in that hydropneumatic tank, and it isn't doing us any good at all over there. Can we get that thing on the market and sell that piece of
Scrap, I
equipment?
would imagine scrap. It's very antiquated.
A lot of
They
people
don't-
want hydropneumatic tanks, and that is a biggie.
Where is it, please?
I'll definitely
Sitting right
look
back
into
here,
that.
where our Wells high service
Oh,
pump.
okay.
It's
I
probably
know
10 foot in diameter, 30 feet long.
The
It's huge.
compressor and the pump that runs the tank, is most definitely, would go on market.
Might sell it as a package.
We're gonna put on Gov Deals.
Gov deals, yeah.
If somebody might buy it as a package.
Maybe.
But anyway, the issue is it's not doing us any good. I just don't wanna see it sitting out there and further
I would imagine
rust.
the county would make us move it eventually.
And then the other one is that I'd like to see a plan, not necessarily short-term, but near short-term, of getting a cover over the top of those high service pumps. We got a lot of equipment out there that is exposed directly to the weather and shouldn't be. We could go in there and put in a crane rail system and some type of a three-sided lean-to cover up to protect those pumps.
We would have to have a removable roof. That would be the only issue.
Well, no,
that I
have a
would-
crane rail. Just have a crane rail that goes right across the top, I-beams, and bring it right straight out to the front. Be easy to do.
Okay. Yes, sir. I will- I
Thanks.
will-
That's all I have.
That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Michael, you're up.
Michael Tisch, for the record, Public Works Manager. Have my report there. The materials from Eco Labs was actually, it's in our bay, if you care to see our 5 pallets of bugs.
I took a look at it. Chris was very proud of it.
Mommy is very excited. She posed and took some selfies with the, with her biological
You
material.
need a life, so, so obvious, you need a life.
But hopefully next week, we'll get we're scheduling the treatment for the lake to actually do the initial kill of the algae that's on the lake, and then 2 days after that, we'll start the treatment of Lake 83. So we're looking for step into the future to do something new that we've never done on that lake. So hopefully we're turning a new page. Things will be better for the residents of Magnolia Lakes.
She's smiling tonight, so it's good. All's good.
Let's see. Our weather bug system is up and working at the soccer complex. Let's see. They did find some plans for the fun park, and I've spoken actually to a few of you. I know you had requested putting a water fountain out there, and we've found plans, so I've got some numbers, and I've got some contractors that I'm gonna be contacting. One of the questions was, in that set of plans that we uncovered, there was also a little structure there that was kinda like a gazebo.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, do you just want me to put the water fountain out there, or do we wanna do a little more, and enhance the fun park and give people an area to,
For
have
safety.
shelter during
Safety.
inclement weather? We've got plans for it, so, it's a 20 by 20 area. We could put a gazebo on.
When you come back to us, I think, can we see both options, like with and without it, so we know
Sure.
what kind of money we're talking about? Because it's easy for us to say, oh, yeah, that sounds great, go ahead and do it, and then find out how much it costs.
I was just wondering, the question that was just if you were would you entertain the thought of, doing something a little more over and above the water fountain? So that was my question.
Yeah, there's no protection out there whatsoever, and a little structure like that with a lightning arrestor on there might save some kid's life.
I also provided, Mr. Tinkle, you'd asked about the dollars spent at the soccer complex. I provided a report that April had produced, because you had come up with a number a few times. You'd said something about the $250,000.
Yeah, April gave me something around 240, 250.
It was in your part of it was in your packet. It was the breakdown, but that included all kinds of things, salary, insurance. I mean, that wasn't just straight costs for landscaping, sod, lighting type thing. I mean, it went into a lot more to come to that 250K number than, just direct costs into the fields.
Yeah, before we go into that deal of the contract, I want to see a complete breakdown, not necessarily all of our other parks, but just this over here, the facility that we subcontract out. What are all of our costs associated with that field? So that we know what we're talking about when we sit down and start negotiating this contract.
Okay.
Madam Chairman, may I make a comment here? Understanding that I am necessarily paranoid at times, there was a backdoor attempt a couple of years ago to discontinue soccer at the Sherman Soccer Complex. And the board, in its inimitable wisdom, voted to continue soccer for our youth. And the resolution indicated that it was very important that we continue soccer. Now, I want to make sure that this is not a backdoor attempt to raise rates so high that we can no longer have soccer at our complex next door.
In speaking with the leagues, that's one of the concerns actually for the start of the, I guess, there had been discussions with April previously to me coming on board that the rates that they had paid last year would go through this year, through 2017. And then the new rate structure would kick in January 1 of 18. Part of the reason being they've already collected fees. They've already sent out notification of what the fees are going to be for this fall.
Well, I'm not talking about the fees that the coaches collect from the students and parents. I'm talking about the fees that we're going to try and put on the soccer teams to continue using the field.
That was part of the discussion because we haven't been charging them for lights.
I
Light-
understand that, and if we start charging them for lights, it's likely we're not going to have soccer teams playing over there.
Let's find out what the.
Find out what the numbers are, so we know what we're subsidizing in it. And if everybody in Gateway's gonna pay for it, I don't have a problem. If everybody in Gateway's gonna pay for it, so I mean, Pelican Preserve's gonna pay for it too,
Why do you say Pelican Preserve should pay for it too?
because you want it.
I want it.
You're like a
as
Democrat.
as
You wanna pay
I want it
everybody
as
to
a-
pay for
I want it
something.
as a
I'm not
member
doing
of the
that.
Gateway Services Board, Ed, not as a Pelican Preserve resident.
And you don't pay over there for it. None of your people pay for that part.
Let's find out what the numbers are
Yeah,
first.
let's find out the
I
number.
think you still have, I certainly continue supporting that. Ms. Flaherty.
Thank you. Excuse me. I talked with Mike earlier today about this, and the problem is that they're destroying the bathrooms and the concession stands, and they're not cleaning. And that was part of their contract, so I think that was one of the issues that he's worried about, because, as Chris said, if they don't clean up the concession stand and food is given out, who's responsible if somebody gets sick? So, there has to be some, way to control that. And I think that's one of the reasons to increase the fees, so that we have a better facility and it's not destroyed.
We can look at all of that as a package.
And part of what I had put together was what April had recommended for the new fee structure that included a little bump up in the cost per hour to utilize the fields, and then implement a charge to help pay for the lighting, because as I also put in my report, the overhaul, the complex has been completed, and that was $78,000. But it's my understanding that we hadn't done anything to really overhaul that lighting system in a very, very long time. So it was in dire need.
So, Bentley Electric, as soon as he gets back from Ireland, wants to sit down with us and generate what the costs were that he'd give us 3-4 months ago. That came up with that 30,000 estimate that I'd given to the board.
So we'll review what you come up with for a fee structure.
Okay, as a question, because as the leagues are looking to start, we still don't have agreements with them. Is the board in agreement that we can charge them the rates that we had this previous year and
Through 2017,
through 17?
so,
Is that would that be your desire to, since we don't have a new rate structure yet, just so they can sign the contracts and we can move
What's
forward?
wrong with the arbitrary increase to start softening the cost? I would go along with that.
The statute does not allow arbitrary increase. We have to have an increase
Then let's
tied
have-
into the operation.
Then let's have the operating cost then,
'Cause
so that we can make a
also have
decision at the
to-
next meeting.
Because we
and
have to
let
have
them know.
a notice, we have to have to set the rate, and then there has to be a public.
right, a public
Right, and the
hearing.
statute talks about rates, fees, and charges necessary to operate, maintain, and repair the facility. It's outlined in the statute, so.
Can we
The
get
basis.
an idea of what those costs are for the next meeting on the 17th, and then just tell them in the meantime that we're going to have a potential cost increase coming, depending upon what the numbers are?
They had asked, they know that I had provided them with what we had initially proposed, so they know that there is a cost increase coming.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
But we
and-
still have to do a public hearing to do that.
Absolutely, notice public
Right.
hearing at least 10 days in advance, advertise and publish the rates. And one other aspect also is, if you recall the settlement with the charter schools, that, and it gets into the lighting owners, I mentioned it just so we don't forget it. It just says that they agree to pay the CDD field lighting fees associated with the use of the recreational facilities. That's the only fees that they otherwise would pay.
Mhm.
So I just-
So then we have to figure out an hourly rate for lighting then?
If you wish to charge lighting,
Yeah.
you know,
I
because
think-
otherwise they don't pay any other field usage fees. That was part of the settlement agreement.
I think what Mike is asking is for the board to decide if we're just going to accept the current fees to get the leagues through the rest of 2017, and then work on if we're gonna have any increases for 2018.
I think he's talking about an immediate increase.
No, sir, I mean, because they had asked if, they've already collected money that they could utilize the rate system that we've had in place currently, and then come January 1, implement a new rate structure.
Sounds good to
I'm
me.
opposed to that.
Do we need a motion for that?
We need a motion.
I motion.
Second.
That-
Oops, excuse me, I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
Okay.
I was gonna read the motion, but that's okay, you seconded before we say, okay?
So the motion is to allow the rate structure that's currently in place through 2017.
Right.
And then we'll work
New-
on a new rate
new-
structure for
New rate
2018.
structure for January of 2018.
Any further discussion?
Only that, when you're working on the new rate structure, the sponsors of the teams have to be involved in that conversation.
Okay.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye?
Aye.
Opposed.
Any opposed?
Opposed.
You're opposed? Okay. So 3-1. Okay. Anything else that you had?
No, ma'am?
Okay, thank you, Mike. Okay, I've got the consent agenda.
A,
Okay. Go ahead, Kathy. Excuse me,
Okay.
Mrs. Flair.
that's
Okay.
good. Okay, page 23, where it says Park and Recreation, we talked about sod installation at the dog park. We also talked about the dog wash, and that wasn't put in, and I think that's important to be in the minutes, because that was a discussion. And the other thing is, there's no time that we adjourned again. I always thought minutes are supposed to have a time that we are adjourned. Am I correct?
I think that's important.
Yes, you
Yeah.
are.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's it.
So, do you want them to bring these minutes back corrected?
Could they correct them as is, or do we have to bring them back?
I'll ask Mr. Bloom for guidance on that. Which would you prefer?
If
You
you
wanna-
can just approve them with those two changes,
Okay.
and we'll get them added to it, and then it's signed
Oh,
once
that's
it's
fine.
corrected.
I mean,
Okay. So you wanna make that motion?
I make a motion that we approve
That's correct.
as corrected the minutes and I guess 4B too.
Okay,
Okay.
so, all right, we have a motion and a second to accept the minutes with the changes and the financial report. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. That moves us to 5B, which is the contract with Land Architects.
And I'll address this issue. We requested the board cancel the contract with Land Architects, Inc. and repurpose the funds to a visible landscaping project. There was a purchase order issued in April of 2016 for Phase 1, $25,000, and another phase with $58,000, $850. Since that time, there's been one invoice for $2,663, another one for $7,045, so a total of $9,700 has been expended out of the $58,850 contract. We had some discussions, a few meetings previously about converting the scope of work to really prioritize the irrigation system over the planting system. We had a revised contract sent by the consultant. After reviewing that contract, there was about $6,700 of the $58,000 that addressed irrigation. And it also was an open-ended contract that said to finish the tasks under this contract, that the consultant would sit with the owner and come up with a fair price to complete the work. So it was our opinion that it was an open-ended contract. It really wasn't accomplishing what we needed to do. The scope of work and the priorities have changed over the last year. And that's our recommendation. Mr. Bill Prezy from Land Architects here is to address the contract issues and answer any questions the board may have.
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, I'm just pretty much came today to give you guys perspective. If you guys want to forward the original contract, revise the contract, or terminate the contract, I will say thank you and appreciate the time I spent with you and walk out the door with a smile on my face and be available on call if services should ever be needed again. I concur with what Chris said in terms of the timing, but just to give you some perspective on the way things came out. If you guys remember, the original board that was here, and I believe it was largely driven by the two gentlemen that used to sit over in the corner, where we really wanted this to be a master planning process. It had a community outreach element to it, and that the original contract was to create a master plan and a graphic element that really brought the community into it, so that the resulting design, so to speak, and the master plan that you had from it would be vetted by the community, so that anything moving forward would have been done under those auspices. I think that gives a board and a district a sense of comfort in terms of doing that. When I sat down and actually started, when Scott left and April came in, got on the same page with April very quickly, and we started going through the inventory and the analysis aspect of it. But once the landscape advisory committee dissolved, that was really the vetting element we were using as part of the team, the staff and the consultant, in terms of getting this information vetted prior to going to the workshops and then prior to coming back to the board. Well, when that board filled, April and I quickly realized we needed to set up a steering committee or a planning committee, so to speak, that would be populated by, representatives of the business community, leaders or representatives of the HOAs, but there seemed to be a lack of synergy. I don't know if it was on staff's part, if it was on the community's part. It just wasn't seeming to come together. And just being a professional and seeing what was transpiring in that regard, and also based on the assessments and the information that I had come across during my inventory and analysis, it seemed very apparent to me that the needs were a little more immediate in terms from a technical standpoint. And that's when we sat down and decided it might be better to change it from less of a community outreach and an overall visioning plan into more of a technical master plan that would help resolve the immediate problems, so you could take incremental designs and improvements from a capital expenditure standpoint to do these things as you're moving forward. You really need to have a master plan before you can implement pieces to it. It really is, it's like building a home without a set of documents, if you want to look at it more in a micro plan. I mean, imagine building a house with no drawings and you have a slab built and wall put up. I mean, just imagine what that would be. If you're gonna go in and start implementing pieces of improvements without understanding what your issues are and what your overall theme should be, you're putting, Band-Aids on a hemorrhaging element there. And actually, that was one of the things when I met with Scott in April earlier, was one of the problems that was addressed, was that they didn't want to continue to do that. Because I believe in the budget there was, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't have that information specifically with me, it's about a $50,000 annual outlay for capital improvements in landscaping. And it seemed very apparent that those weren't working, people weren't satisfied with it. Sometimes they were failing, and there just really wasn't any cohesion to it. And you couple that with the issues of the irrigation system, you can really see where you're just throwing good money after bad. So what we wanted to do was to repurpose the contract, and that's where it came into where Chris's involvement came in, was to let's look at how we address your immediate needs. And from my initial investigations and some of my discussions with staff, and as Chris had pointed out to me, it didn't seem as far as your irrigation system goes, your source of water seems to be adequate between the affluent influx that you're getting and with your wells, coupled that in with the pump systems, that the infrastructure of your irrigation system seems to be relatively intact and functioning. The problem with the irrigation system is the lack of central control and the actual deliveries out to the specific landscape areas. That's where it's, frankly to say, is quite a mess. It needs a lot of work. The only way you can really achieve any improvements in landscape design is you have to understand what your infrastructure is. And if the revised proposal that I gave to you was to look at inventorying and auditing your irrigation system to the point of what it is that it really needs to have done to it, so it can function from a standpoint of how does it address your current landscape and how it may address any landscape you might want to be introducing at a later date and through time. If you really don't have a handle on that, you really could be throwing a lot of money away. And anybody that comes in that does, if you hired somebody to come in and do, let's say we want to do a landscape plan for Griffin Drive from Gateway Boulevard out to 82, you'd have to know what the existing infrastructure is. You'd have to have your existing plant material, all inventory, and all that done anyway before you could come up with a viable, executable landscape plan. One of the things that's the thing that we wanted to do here was to take the as-built drawings that were done, audit those into actually assessing what is wrong with the system and what needs to be done. And what I brought in was a contractor and a manufacturer who are not being paid. It's not like I'm introducing money into the situation that you're paying for. This is bringing in the expertise so that we can come back to you and say, this is exactly the type of system we think that you need to install. These are the elements you need to have, and these are relative budgetable amounts of money that you're gonna need to set aside to execute the irrigation system overall and in each of these elements as it would tie down to the landscape. The other side of it would be is to go out and inventory the existing trees, palms that you have out there. I believe Al Harris has a spreadsheet that indicates the number of oaks you have, the number of palms you have, and whatnot. But you don't have anything illustratable on a set of documents that you can relate back to your as-built irrigation plan. You have to be able to marry those two before you can really get started on anything. And that's one of the things that we thought we could do in the purpose of this contract, was to take that information so you would have that. If anything came out of that, that would be a value to you, that would be gold from a management standpoint. And then the third aspect of it is the management standpoint, is looking at, right now I believe you're spending about $750,000 a year annually on landscape management of your landscape, your irrigation system and whatnot. And going through and really looking at how that breaks down into each line item. And I can tell you through the course of my profession over 30 years, usually when you get into a management plan of that size, and this kind of complexity, when you really start to audit that, you can usually find savings in terms of either effect or cost that range anywhere from 5 to 10% is usually a given. And if you can, if I could accomplish a 5 to 10% increase in effect, that in itself would be a wonderful aspect of the service we provided for you. If I could do both and actually save you 5 or 10% of the cost of it, that would pay for the contract in its entirety, all in itself. So there's a lot of hidden benefit into the services I'm providing for you, and I hope you would consider that before terminating it based on maybe a lack of understanding of what it is that we were actually commissioned to do in the first place.
Mrs. Flaherty, I know that you are involved in the landscape committee, and you're probably, of the board members, know more about this than anyone else. Do you have any comments?
Yes, I do. Okay, but I would prefer listening to the other board members first and then.
I'm calling you first.
Okay. All right. I have talked to Mr. Parisi and I've talked to Chris about this agenda item. And I guess there's some kind of communication problem, and I don't know where the problem is exactly, and each person says it's the other person, and since I'm not involved in that communication, I'm not quite sure. However, we also discussed the irrigation, and Chris thought that they could subcontract an irrigation person just as well as Bill can subcontract it, and that it would be cheaper, okay? And so I said, well, then that needs to be discussed and brought to the board if there was some way that we could do it.
I would love to speak to that, too.
Yeah, to do that. However, in this recommendations, he's not put irrigation, so I did mention that today to Chris, because you put in improvements of the landscaping. But it really was, what we were talking about was the irrigation, okay? And that's where the concern lied. Chris, can I say it this way? Feels that maybe the money isn't allocated correctly, and there has to be some other ways of doing that. And I understand, what Bill is saying about, drawing what we need and looking at it. However, because it's an economical situation and we really don't want to put too much on any one person, I feel that if we took out the irrigation and then had Bill take care of what the landscaping should be, maybe we could get a compromise.
And is Danny still here?
Yes. I didn't talk to
Wake
him.
up,
Wake
Danny,
up,
wake
Danny.
up. wake up.
Didn't you do an irrigation plan for us for the landscaping? I mean, I'm thinking like 4 or 5 years ago
It's a
that
master
we
plan.
dug into.
Not for irrigation, no.
Okay, all right.
We did have one done by Mainscape.
Okay,
And we-
I knew
and-
there was
and-
something.
And it was presented and basically ignored in light of the fact that a plan for landscaping, because this whole thing is getting the cart before the horse. We're doing the same thing over at Gateway Greens right now.
Mm-hmm.
Unless and until you define what you're going to plant, it drastically changes what you're going to need in the way of water demands. So you've got to get your landscaping design done first of what you're going to do. The other problem we've got, which we have the same problem over in Gateway, is we know where all of our master irrigation system is. The problem, what we don't know in Gateway Greens and here, is how does it get out of that 4-inch pipe into that little head that pops up out of the ground? We have no idea where that stuff is, other than the fact we have it in zones, and what Bill was alluding to is we entered into a contract about 4 or 5 years ago with Mainscape and had a GIS big thick book made, and Elle's got that.
I thought I remembered that.
The problem is, it's an aerial view of the zones, but it doesn't say what's in the zones and or what the condition of the pipe is. But that's immaterial, because if
That's
you're
the
gonna
as-built
change
that
a
I've
zone from grass to, let's say, some type of like signature plants, you might be able to get away today, some technology with a drip as opposed to the rotating deal, so, for water conservation. But to me, the whole thing is, the first deal that I thought the committee and the architect was doing was developing what I believe you were referring to Rod and Gary were wanting was the plan. What's the new look of Gateway going to be? Then you go in and address the irrigation, in my opinion. And I don't think we ever got off first base.
I think you're right about that, Mr. Tinkle, and that is a perspective. I don't think a landscape architect worth his weight in salt should design or master plan a landscape in a community of this complexity without understanding the infrastructure that supports it, without question. And also part of that is you need to go out and determine what the soils are out there, because what was planted 30 years ago and what is now there based on the amount of organics that are now into that. As I can tell just by running out here, even in the winter sometimes, that when the irrigation's running, you see runoff, and that means the heads are either producing too high a precip rate and or are running too long. So what happens is the soil gets to a saturation point and it turns into runoff, and then you add irrigation water in there on your roads, your sidewalks, and into your stormwater system. So there's a component of understanding what the soils are as far as the way you design your irrigation system just as well.
And we have limitations on that, in that we have a contract with Lee County that we use, and we want to use every drop of water that comes out of that wastewater treatment plant. That is our ace. The issue is, sometimes in the middle of the summer, like for the last 45 days, we haven't needed any water. But the trouble is, we have to put it on the ground, and our residents aren't using it because they don't need it, so what do? Onto our common areas, and you can't get out there. You'd have to have an airboat to mow the grass. It's so muddy. And that influences our decision. So this gets even deeper than just the normal irrigation woes. We have the problem is, what are we gonna do with that water that we have to get rid of in the summertime?
Now, it's actually-
Although I do, if I may, I just tend to disagree just a touch, because the agreement talks about, there's a caveat in there with regards to sort of like best management practices for landscaping.
Landscaping, correct.
So if we believe too much watering will kill the landscaping, I believe we can legitimately refuse to accept it.
Well, I don't even wanna go down that road, because I know what's coming next. They're gonna want it. And my deal is, we can't get rid of that water.
I wanted to
We
mention
gotta have it.
something that, when it
I'm
came
saying-
in,
I'm saying it's-
when it came into,
Yeah,
when
I
I
think
it's a good idea.
offered to modify the contract, is that, much to April's cajoling, is I agreed to include the FP&L easement, the soccer complex, and the commons pool area, in addition to my contract, without adding any fee. And that's a lot of additional services that I accepted to do under the same contract amount. But attending to your concern that you just brought up, is the FP&L easement actually presents itself as a great opportunity to distribute a lot of that. And that's actually a hidden gem from a community asset standpoint that's really unrealized right now.
Mr. Guy, did you have any comments or questions?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Whenever I have the opportunity, I like to support the recommendations of our district manager. My experience with contracts is that often the parties are talking past each other. They don't agree on what the original concept was. And in the final analysis, you're better off just canceling the contract and starting over from scratch, if that's what you want to do. So, if I'm correct that that's part of what's going on here, I think we ought to accept the recommendation of our district manager.
Mrs. Flaherty, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
I was just gonna say, when Bill first started, he was supposed to be doing the landscaping, and then when April took over, it kinda changed, okay? Cause that's where we were at, and then,
And to address Mr. Guy's concern, I've never had a problem getting on Scott's and then April's on the same page with them. Over 30 years of practice, I've learned to be a very good listener and to deliver what my clients' expectations are. For some reason, at this juncture, I'm just not sure why we can't get on the same page. And I think it's just a breakdown in communication.
That's what I tried to say. You said
But
it
it just
much
happened.
better.
But I would hate to see you throw the baby out with the bathwater in that regard. But if that's the will of the board, then I'll accept it as well.
So if we were to take out the irrigation portion of the contract, and we just had you do the landscaping, what's the dollar we're talking about? Is it what's in the book that you're saying this doesn't include any irrigation work, what we've got in the book when we're looking
I
at
had to
it?
audit the system, I think I had around $8,000 in there to do that. $6,500.
What was that?
$6,500.
To audit the entire irrigation system?
Yeah.
Sounds very small.
Well, if you read the scope, and the way I've tried to explain that, it's a function of, I'm not gonna go in and assess your wells and your pumps, because to tell you the truth, for somebody to go in to assess your pumps, you really need somebody who's got MEP experience. I'm a landscape architect, I understand irrigation, but that is a little beyond my pay grade, is understanding that level of complexity. I could manage it, but I would bring in probably an MEP that understood that. But from what I understand, there's nothing wrong with the wells, there's nothing wrong with the pumps, all of that's fine. It was more a function of taking the as-bills that have already been done and auditing how they are functioning in the delivery of water out to the landscape areas. So I mean, and if you read the scope of my audit, that's what I'm proposing to do. If I was going in and auditing this system from where the water comes from to where it goes, $6,500 would scratch the surface of it. But from what I need to do from the standpoint of understanding that system, of how it pertains to how you're going to preserve the plant material you have, or to be able to add anything to it, that's what I was talking about, auditing and assessing. Because you can see out there, there's some obvious issues with delivery of water.
So-
But if you wanna take that out, I'd be happy to, I would say we're probably gonna need to discuss that along the way, but if Chris and his staff wants to handle that aspect of it, I'd be more than happy to work with them in that capacity.
So where are you with what you have accomplished during the time that you've been working on this project for us?
You want a history of it, or you just want me to answer the question?
Yeah, just,
Pretty much have executed task one.
okay.
All of category number one, I should say, not task one, all of basically the inventory and the analysis we've done and some of the assessments. And basically, that's what I'm out here talking about, is the assessments. Our findings of, that took quite a bit of effort to go out and inventory and assess everything that's going on out there. Tell you the truth, and I haven't even talked about some of the commercial code issues you have out there that, once addressed, would add significantly to your landscape as well. There's another aspect of that as well. But I kinda think that's kind of a moot point to where we're at right now.
So I guess what's in front of us is, do we wanna continue, or do we want to not continue?
I'd like to move that we accept the recommendation of our district manager and discontinue the contract.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second for discussion. My thought is, and I agree with Bill on the deal, but I'm still a little bit concerned. Our whole idea was to develop a landscape plan. And I haven't seen anything that even begins, nor even heard of anything that begins to resemble what we're going to be doing. What's our front entrance, what's our back entrance, what's our Griffin Drive entrance, what's any of those look like?
That is the end game.
And I'm assuming that, with whatever decision we make, that's still on the table. So we still gotta figure out, if we want to go on ahead and develop a landscaping plan, we're gonna be right back here talking about this same thing to do it over again. The issue is, and I agree with Bill on this respect, is if we understand the same King's English on irrigation system audit. To me, we've got an audit of our irrigation system. When I say irrigation system, I'm talking about our mains. We got maps coming out the bonzo. We know where our mains are at. We know where our meters are at, all 65 or 70 of them that serve our common areas, which is what they'll have to take off of. What we don't know, other than the map that Mainscape prepared for us, is we know we go hit this controller to zone 1, these in this area pop up. What the condition of those or an inventory of what those are, we have no clue. The issue is that what you were talking about, inventory?
Yes.
Okay.
That is really the nature of the audit that I was proposing.
And
Because
my
that's
thought-
how it would apply to the landscape that you have and you would propose.
My thought on that is that, again, cart and horse, that's needed, there's no doubt about that. But until you know what you're gonna build, you don't know if it's going to be usable. So the two have to go together, but to me, the first thing is, come up with a plan. Are we going to go with all grass? Are we gonna go with all flowers? Are we gonna go tree? What are we coming up with? That then determines the demand. That determines the demand.
Madam Chair, if
May I,
that-
excuse me,
I'm
may I
sorry.
just say one thing mostly in agreement, but from the time that we originally awarded this contract, a lot of things have changed, including the construction of a new high school, and including the expansion of Route 82. So
True.
when we think about what you just said, we have to have a plan with some flexibility in it to get to where we eventually wanna go.
Well, the part, Bill, that I don't understand is that, did the committee ever get to the part, and the issue with April, to me, that was wrong person, wrong position. She had no background in this whatsoever, so that's like the blind leading the blind. Did the board or the committee, because I don't think the board did, to my knowledge, the board created the committee and gave it to the committee to work with the landscape architect, Bill. Did they ever get to the point of, here we want this is our vision, we'd like to see this, or we'd like to see 2 or 3 did we ever even get that far?
No.
Didn't we get to a point where there was a vision and then there was a lot of negative?
Might as well have a deck of
Not
cards
from
and play
the,
cards.
that's from the committee was dissolved before that.
I think the only thing we ever saw plans for was the medians where the palm trees were taken out.
Yeah, that was
Those
it.
were the plans,
But-
that section.
But following up on this,
Yeah.
again, going along with what Bill says, we're going to be, the minute we vote on this, we're gonna be right back at square one. What are we going to do to continue this, or are we just gonna drop the landscaping and say we're gonna wait a couple of years?
And-
Because our
and
deal
that's-
is, we're gonna be right back hiring an architect.
Yeah, that's correct.
I would be fine if you guys want to assess the performance on a task-by-task basis as well.
Well-
Instead of me I'd be happy to bring my findings to the board at the conclusion of each task.
And Bill, I will say this, I don't know, and I don't wanna get into disagreeing with what Chris may have, or the conversations you've had with Chris, but the way this thing took off, it just looks like to me that, and not with trying to cover up for what you did or didn't do, it just didn't look like this thing had a chance for success from day one.
Call the question.
Well, our district manager wanted to make.
And my only comment was, if you're looking at that concept first, and it's a priority of the board, which it was at that time with Mr. Senior and Mr. Newbauer, you could just revert back to the original contract, which was the $58,000. He's done $10,000 of them, and let him finish his original contract. Which I guess there's 48,000, and that would complete the Exhibit B scope of work, which was from March 16th, 2016. My only issue was, the district manager, I picked it up and saw something was executed in April of 2016. There were no invoices in the file, nothing paid, nothing had been done. When you see that 14 months later, it's time to do something.
Chris, with
So I'm
what?
calling the question.
So with what you see, would you be opposed to, let's say, reconstructing the whole concept of what we were trying to do? And would Bill or his firm be viable on a second RFP to maybe re-engineer this whole thing?
That could be in
Chris,
the
I'd be happy to structure it in any way it makes you feel comfortable and execute.
Yeah, and it's, like I said, the original scope of work was a conceptual plan for the roadways. What you're gonna put in the plants, and if that's a priority, again, I saw it,
Yeah.
14 months, no activity. Wanna
And
get something moving.
You said you're willing to, you've completed the Category 1, the master plan programming and base data. Okay, and has that been provided to the district, that's shared? Can we get that information shared with the entire board?
Would you like me to send, I think
It's
I
big.
provided it as a
Yeah.
PDF.
I haven't seen
It's a
that.
40-page color document set that costs about $600 per set to produce.
If we could have that in here to where each of us could come in and look at it, that would be suffice for me.
Just so we have access to it, that'd be fine. To provide a copy of it isn't necessary. And then if you did category 2, you provide us a report for that, you know, so that you said you give us.
Are we taking a desire to go under the direction of the original contract or out of the revised one? Because I just wanted to just add to, I think Ed kind of hit the nail on the head about the problem with the original contract is that it was truly a community outreach visioning type of approach. And to make that successful, we'd really have to figure out a way to get the community involved. The second approach is to do something that's more technical and immediate need of what the district needs. And then the end product would be a visioning product that you could share with the community to get their feedback on. So I'm happy to go either direction.
A good example of this, and I said this when the board was talking about it 2 years ago, and me and landscape architects, we sometimes have a difference of opinion on the way they do things, but in their defense on this, what drove me nuts when we did this before and hired the firm and went through this, the one thing that was never discussed, what's our budget?
And I
What's our
thought-
budget? I mean, you could go out and do a rework of Gateway.
You're talking about the planning budget,
Yes, sir.
right? And
No,
the
no, 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 no.
irrigation
The
budget?
construction budget. We could blow $1 million so fast, make your head spin.
I don't think $1 million would even get you.
And
there.
the issue is, are we willing, ready
Are we ready
to
to
go
do
and
that?
spend that kind of money? Because if you're not willing to spend that kind of money, then hiring an architect, landscape architect, to come up with a plan, it'll go up there in the hot box and sit with all the other junk we got. It's just a waste. So if you're not willing to spend that, and as Bill just said, and I totally agree with him, $1 million isn't gonna touch it.
The benefit you get from the master plan is that it would be phased and then you could
It's what you would have to
incrementally
do.
do it
Yeah.
without.
Areas.
Without stubbing your,
Yep.
stubbing your toe every
And then
time
tie
you
it
spend
together in a phase
$100,000.
project.
Correct.
And also, this will take time to accomplish. It's not like we'll have this in December. This is gonna take time,
I could commit to having it done inside of 18 months.
okay?
And if Chris really pushed me, I could probably commit to a year.
I'd like to do what Bill said. We just kind of push chair back, breathe a little bit, look and see what he has done. Then reconsider how we want to proceed with this, because the first thing I would say is, I don't have any problem with doing the concept, but then we're gonna have to do the phasing. But the phasing somehow is gonna have to tie into the financing, because this is going to have a limitation, how we pay for it.
Bill's vote was to cancel it altogether.
Yes, I understand that.
And you seconded it.
Yeah,
So
and
you're
I
in
would agree with that,
agreement?
and then we reconvene to figure out how we want to proceed. My only point is that I believe in fairness, and again, not saying anything against what Chris has said. I just think this thing got off on the wrong, it didn't have any more chance of making it than that Titanic did going across the Atlantic. We didn't tell anybody what to do, and the people that were guiding it were rookies. They didn't know what they were doing.
I think that's why so much time went by and so little got accomplished, that
Okay.
there just wasn't synergy.
I'm willing to do that and come back and revisit after
This
we've had a
is-
chance to look at everything that's been done. But I do, I agree with Bill on what Chris said.
Mrs. Flaherty.
Okay, your, concepts, the papers, Al has them, there's 2 of them,
Okay.
okay? I've already seen them. Also, when April came in and took over, I asked her to contact Bill. It took her a while to do that, because I remember at a meeting I did request what was happening, and there wasn't anything. So
But-
a lot of this is to do with communication too.
Yeah. Did I misunderstand you say, Bill, there's a 40-page report in addition to
The
photos?
the
It's
drawing
drawings.
set's around 40 pages.
They're drawings, they're big.
Okay, so
big-
then there's work done.
Yes.
Yes.
I think we need to look at it.
I'd be
So-
happy to present it if you'd like.
Oh.
I think you would need a special meeting to do so. It'd take
That's
probably a
fine.
couple hours.
What I would like, I would take you up on that. I'd like to look at it, and if all the rest would agree, everybody look at it. It may necessitate that we call him back in to ask questions, to figure out where we go next.
I'm of the opinion that, and I'll be the last one to speak on this, that at this point in time, I don't wanna just cancel the contract. I'd like to give him the opportunity to work with Chris and perhaps Mrs. Flaherty and rework the scope of categories 2 and 3, so that we do have a better direction of where we really want this to head. He's already done a significant amount of work that we haven't even, I haven't
I haven't
put
seen
eyes
it.
on it, I haven't seen it. So I would not vote in favor of canceling this, but I'm happy to call the question and see where we end up. And that was, to repeat your motion, Bill, please.
Well, ask Chris first. Can you work with a timeout until we get a chance to look at this and then hold on this decision?
I'll be delegating that to Mike. It's a public works function, so I'm sure he'll be happy to.
Okay.
Having heard that, I'll withdraw my motion.
Yeah, I'll withdraw a second.
Okay, so I think we have a direction that we will try and rework what we are hoping we see for the future.
What we want to accomplish.
Yeah, and, you know, in 18 months' time, we should have a really good idea what we're gonna do and how much money we're willing to actually put toward planting.
Don't forget, we're gonna have a new high school.
Let
I've
me
heard
ask.
that. Yeah, I have heard that.
Kat,
I actually
who-
was on their construction committee and voted for that location.
And a new fire station.
Who was our liaison on that committee as staff on that? Well, the only one that I know that has, let's say, the knowledge and the background to have worked on this stuff and had was either L and/or the guy that we brought in, Anthony, for a while. Those are the only two that are on staff that had, at that time, that had any knowledge of this. Were they intimately involved with the committee on this work?
No, April came to the committee.
April didn't know squat about this.
Let's go on to the next
Yeah,
item.
yeah, let's get back together and look at the stuff.
Thank you.
Should I get with Chris subsequent to this meeting?
Yes, and
Chris, I will do
Mike,
so.
I guess Mike, did Mike leave? Okay,
And the papers are here to look at, correct?
yes.
Yes, Al has them.
Great.
We'll get a
Chris, should I
chance
reach
to
out
do
to
that.
Mike?
Yes.
I will do so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then tell Mike to contact me.
All right. Fortaline, he's been patient for a long time. Request for retainage of water meter replacement project. Yes, Mrs. Flaherty,
May I ask him a question?
certainly. He needs to come to the podium, please.
So, this time I won't make humor, even though, okay? I have a question that's probably a little strange too. I wanna know why an audit was done, okay, before all the meters were put in. I've never heard of an audit being done without all the work being done.
Because that's why we did an amendment to the contract, of what work was done for us.
Okay, but all the meters weren't now put in.
That's why we did the amendment, because we were done. We were done, putting in, our portion we wanted out of the contract. There's a lot of other things that went on, so we did an amendment to the contract. In order to do that, we agreed to do a sweep, to say all the meters that we put in work to the satisfaction that we're done. And once that's accepted, which it was, then we're completed with it in the contract. Then y'all hired somebody to finish, I don't know, I think there was like maybe 100 meters left to do.
And so who's responsible for those meters if they don't work correctly?
Well, we still have warranty with the meters, we'll warranty the meters and everything else, that's just the installation and everything, whoever y'all hired to put them in. The warranty of those meters does not stop regardless of who puts them in.
I still don't understand why an audit was done without all the meters being put in. I mean, if they're still your meters, so I would assume, I'll use the word assume, that you would want them to work properly before you guarantee a warranty, and that's,
We already know they're working properly, we already have 99.3% working now, we know they're working properly. We're not worried about our meters, we wanted out of the contract and did the amendment because of a lot of things that happened during the contract that we had trouble. There's no sense in going into it. There are many issues with ST. It doesn't matter, that's why we amended the contract, so we could be absolved from those issues.
now I have one.
I mean, the warranty does not go away on the meters they're installed. Every time they're installed, I mean, they get put into your system, they show they're working right at that moment.
Okay.
I mean, it's instantaneously.
Now, I still haven't found out, was the audit accepted by the supervisors?
And I didn't get a chance to,
No, I didn't think it was presented to the supervisors.
That's what I wanna know, why wasn't it presented? That would have to be, the follow-through, the audit should have been gone through the supervisors to accept it. So then it never was actually accepted.
That's a problem with the management system we had at that time, which is a totally separate issue, but
According to Tyler Wainwright, it was, and he admitted to that last week when he was here, or 2 weeks ago when he was here. He said it was presented to you guys and said it was accepted. I don't know, said it was accepted to us. And like I said, it also was proven that, I mean, you have a workable system now of all the meters you installed. I don't understand what the problem is when you got 99.3 and everything was installed.
I'll tell you what the problem is.
Not 100%.
We entered into a contract with you and your sub for $1.2 million to install these meters, partially on the advice of our professional engineer, Tetra Tech, that informed us that this would be a quote-unquote turnkey system. That means you guys provide the meters, you install the meters, and we pay you for it, period. It was anything but that. It was a lousy bunch of installation, and for you to stand there and indicate otherwise begins to irritate me. Well, you know that it was not a turnkey operation.
Sir, when we finished the amended agreement and we did the audit and the sweep, it was turnkey. It was proven that was turnkey. I don't know what your definition of turnkey is, but when we give you a sweep and you accept it and it tells you all the meters are in the ground, professionally installed, and they are reading, how do you not consider that turnkey? What is your definition of turnkey?
My definition of turnkey is that your company, Fortiline, and your subs, whoever they happen to be, install the meters in a professional manner, in a reasonable period of time, to the point where they're working, and we pay you for them.
Sir, they were installed before the contract ended. You do realize that, right?
I
There
don't
was a
think, I don't think,
timeframe on the- there
I
was
think
a
they were,
timeframe on
I
the
think they were
contract.
delivered, they weren't installed. The last I heard, there were
When
still
we
some
did
that
the
not
sweep,
installed.
They were installed before the contract date was ended.
I think the issue, what Bill's trying to say, and I authored that white paper on this subject, and I've, since our last meeting, have come across some documents that I was not aware of that opens this up to a different situation. But the definition of the turnkey, as it was explained at the pre-bid conference, as explained at the pre-construction conference, is the CDD's hours to be involved in this project were to be basically none. What we ended up doing is spending one heck of a lot of time of correcting mistakes and/or doing labor not performed by your two subs. I understand you were kind of a middleman. You had no skin in the game on this, other than as the prime, you subbed out all the labor, you subbed out all the materials.
Well, we
And the
also-
issue is that we did not get the turnkey portion of it.
Well, your definition of turnkey is also questionable as well. I mean, turnkey, if your definition of me installing a meter, I go and put it in the meter box and we can see that the meter's working. It's installed correctly. If the meter box is broke or anything else, that's not necessarily my responsibility. I mean, turnkey is just a meter being accepted into your system and it's reading the meter. It's giving you revenue.
I think this, pretty well, the attorney brings this out. This is from the contract documents that was attached to the, to the contract.
This is a technical proposal, step one, which is incorporated into the ultimate contract.
The vendor is responsible for providing all ancillary equipment, software, or where applicable, labor needed to make the item a complete functioning unit. Good example, and this is where I'm dropping back to, were the transmitters that we had to go out. Kenny drove and drove and drove with the computer trying to isolate these signals. Granted, Zenner provided the material, but we provided the labor to install them. That should not have happened. That should not have happened. That is certainly not in accordance with the agreement and or the understanding of the turnkey. So
Okay,
based on
Mr.
that,
Seymour, how much does that cost then?
well, that's what I was just getting ready to say. Based on that, I would like to make a motion, Margaret, that I'm dropping back off of my white paper but in light of the email that was authored by April, and Tony brought it up at the last meeting, I had come up with somewhere in the neighborhood of $95,000 of labor charges that I'd come up with my system of doing it, which was nothing more than interviews, time the hourly rate, time employees. Well, we have a document here that where work was set down and calculated with Kenny for 480 hours, only instead of times 23, I'm multiplying it times 25.94, which was his hourly rate, works out to be $11,465.48. We had 2 change orders, of which, in my opinion, $3,159.92 were legitimate. The rest of those change orders were illegitimate as can be, $12,189.80. My motion is to enter into a change order with the contract and make it a unilateral contract change order if necessary, in the tune of a deduct of about $23,600 in change as a deduct, and pay the difference of the $98,000 request for payment to Coeur
Second
d'Alene.
the motion.
I'm making that motion.
Did you hear me?
I'm sorry.
I said second the motion.
Thank you, Bill.
So, what's the exact amount? 23,600?
Add in 11,465.48 and 12,189.80.
What's
So,
the first number?
11,465.48, which is 480 times 25.94, Kenny's hourly rate at that time. And the change orders total were 15,000 and some change, of which 3159.92 was legitimate, 12,189.80 was contract work.
I come up with, and Stephen can double check me, he's a math wizard, I come up with 23,655.28.
And I deduct that from 98,000 and whatever the amount was on the 98,649.64, subtract that 23,000 whatever from it, and that was, I would make that as final payment. And along with that, I would suggest that we sign a certificate of substantial completion dated September 1st, 2016, to the contract and to Coeur d'Alene, and sign it.
Excuse me. Could you repeat all those numbers, please? So
Okay.
we can add them and subtract them? I'm not that fast.
Kenny's time is 480 hours at 25.94, which if my math is right is 11,465.48. The 2 change orders were for 15,349.70, of which I think 12,189.80 of it is
So 12
illegitimate,
12,000.
189.80, and add that to the 11,465.48, which is 23, somebody add it,
23,655.28 is what.
My math is correct.
23,655.28, that would be a change order deduct to the contract in the amount of final payment of $98,649.64. And so we're gonna be issuing a final payment to them in the amount of around $75,000, and concurrent with that, signing a certificate of substantial completion dated September 1, 2016.
I'm not gonna ask if that makes you happy, but can you live with that?
I will advise our council of your decision. Me personally, no. I mean, my recommendation will not be to take that. But I'm only a mouthpiece for our company, and I will tell you some of the reasons why one will advise differently. But one of the reasons that it may be go ahead and take it is because the same thing I said from the get-go is we have tried to make things right from the get-go.
I'm
But
sorry, say that again,
We
please.
have tried to make things right from the get-go and all the way through. Look, we're a service company. We deal with counties, municipals all across the state, and many other states all across the United States. And our goal is always to make our customers happy. I will tell you that during this course of action, there's been several breaches of contracts. There's been, we entered into one where your lawyer specifically knew that it would be in conflict of interest with ST, and we
Excuse
tried to
me,
get out of it.
read my memorandum, Mr. Chairman, if I'm, Madam Chairman. Read my memorandum, I don't know if you read my memorandum, I have another copy for you if you'd like. I did not make that opinion, and I also advised the ultimate opinion is determined by the Commission on Ethics. But I have that copy of the memo if you want to read it.
Madam Chairman, that's all extraneous
Right.
to this discussion.
Yeah, this is just a matter of, look, I have an opinion to whatever I wanna say. Thank you, sir.
You advised the board as to what my opinion was.
I'm advising you what my opinion of what you were doing was.
That's fine.
I'm gonna interject in here that the amount that I come up with that Mr. Tinkle is advising that we release is the $74,994.36. That's what I come up with.
That's what I come up to. I didn't
Okay.
use a calculator, just so you know.
I mean,
My brain had to have a calculator at this point in time.
you
That's
also
my
have to
motion.
remember in answering his question too, you got people that are preaching to work here that also, that we have many a conversations with, and they're directing ST and a lot of other things, and they end up being fired, and we have lots of information that they, provide us that ST was doing. We also believe the subcontractor was also, talking with ST while they worked with you and trying to get other change orders and other things done. We have multiple documentation. We have also many documentations on our expenses and flying down and trying to get this resolved. He's talking about the change orders and a lot of other things. And also just this part he
God bless
read,
you.
the part he read about what is included in turnkey. Once again, I will still stress that there are still definitions about that part. If I come out to the meter and there's a tree laying on the meter box,
That's your responsibility.
no, it's not.
Yeah, it is.
No, it's not.
I've heard enough of this. Can we call the question?
I just wanna, I will call the question, I just wanna make one comment that hopefully we're going to have a long-term relationship with this company because we've got warranty with them, so.
No, our warranty is with Center.
Center?
Yeah.
Okay.
Our warranty with them expires in, if you accept my motion of September 1, our warranty 12-month expires with them in 27 days,
Wow. Oh, okay,
28 days. I'm sorry, it has
Don't-
31.
don't trip them up.
31, sorry about that.
okay. So your motion is to, release the funds of $74,994.36 and make that, retroactive to September 1st, 2016.
With a deductive change order, I think. it
With a
was.
deductive change order.
Okay, with a deductive.
Yeah, the change order has to be able to reduce that amount. You want a paper trail.
By those
Okay.
factors and the categories that were articulated by Mr. Tinkle.
All right.
Danny, can you guys put together that change order?
Y'all be sending that in an email to us?
Yeah, we'll send that to you. Because that will be, yeah, we have to have them, and if they don't sign the change order, then we'll just issue it as a unilateral change order.
So I will call the question. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? All right.
You don't want to go down this road.
Number you hit.
He don't want to.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That brings us to the turnover and conveyance of Casella phases 1 and 2. We're good.
I'll be very brief actually at this point, but certainly here to answer any questions or engage in further discussion. But I have here the agenda item memo from staff. This is for Casella 1 and 2, roads and drainage, originally submitted, I think in December 9th of 2016. And it raises an issue with respect to the large sandbar in the flowway, which is somebody previously indicated was the result of two projects, different engineers, I believe, properly built, permitted, butting up against each other, which resulted in where the bank of the one canal was appearing to be a sandbar right now. And I believe there's been some discussions along the line of having that go back to the Water Management District for some further questions as to whether they deem it to be a problem. Both permits, I believe, have been signed off on as complete, but then this particular issue that kind of is a hybrid issue has come up. And, you know, we would certainly like to see that, the Casella 1 and 2 turnover go through and have this issue still be going on with Carina 2, hopefully resolved before Carina 2 comes up, but Carina 2 would be contingent on us getting our resolution of this issue. So,
You're
just,
talking about the flowway.
I'm talking about the flowway and the, for lack of a better word, the sandbar as it's been referred to, yes. So my understanding is district staff is gonna go back to the Water Management District to, no pun intended, flush out this issue a little bit. But either permit stands on their own. It just so happens they butt up against each other, which has this ridge in the middle of two sort of separate projects. So we would ask that this get accepted, which I believe is otherwise acceptable to staff, and then move on engineering staff.
Thank you.
Is that, okay?
Exclude council staff from that.
Okay, and then Mr. Pierce and I can, I guess, here talk about over the next 5 or 10 minutes other issues.
I think we need to expand on that engineering side of it a little bit more, and Chris and Danny and everybody was in on that meeting. The problem that I have is the documentation from both consultants, I believe, both RWA and Waldrop, have submitted documentation which approaches a certification to South Florida Water Management District as to what was done. One of the problems I've got, and I've ran into it at Hampton Park, South Florida, like Lee County, they shoot before they even aim. And they approve this stuff.
Ready, fire, aim.
Ready, fire, aim. And they do it on the basis of, one, they don't have people that are knowledgeable in the positions that they should have. And the second one is they don't have enough staff to come out and check it. So they take the engineer's word. My problem on this one was, one of the documents that came out, and I thank David and all the people for bringing in, RWA, they brought in a 24 by 36 inch drawing. I do not believe South Florida Water Management District saw that drawing. Now, there was some inferences as to what was on the drawing, but I don't think they saw that drawing. And that drawing graphically shows, and I don't want to call it a silt buildup or a soil buildup. What I believe it was, and I think we discussed this at the meeting, this is a comedy of errors is what it was. Get the ones right. Carina on the north had a plan, and the idea was to move that channel and widen the channel. So they started coming out and digging. The problem is their plan is about a 200-foot across right-of-way to right-of-way. Back line to back property line, about 200 feet. Their plan goes out 75 feet, whatever the number was. And keep in mind, we're not talking a straight line. This thing's doing this all the way down. So their contractor goes out and starts digging out. Well, the problem is, and in a lot of the areas where he was digging and terminating his digging as the scope of the work, he was still on what was the land, because we found riprap. Riprap don't go down the lake like that. Riprap had been placed because it was a part of the shore. Well, then the other contractor came in on the Casella project. They went the other way. Well, if you put the two profiles from one set of plans and put the other two set of plans with it at the same place, they don't meet. There's about a 50 to 60 foot gap. And guess what's in the gap? The inference was most engineers, I'm sorry?
It's rock.
Yeah, most engineers, when you draw a profile and you show a line going over, the inference is it goes over that away, not an inference that there's a hump. So we had one engineer that has a set that comes down and the profile goes across the bottom, showing that it's relatively flat. Another one comes from the other side, going down, coming across, showing relatively flat. And the assumption is they're flat where they meet. Well, the problem is the plans don't show them meeting. It's got the gap, and in the gap is this product.
Can't we just table this thing until the next meeting and let the folks talk?
That's where I'm going, Bill. That's where I'm going. Where I'm headed to is I'm of the opinion that, first of all, there's three issues. There's an aesthetic issue, which I really don't want to get into. In South Florida Water Management District, I can tell you they don't give a damn about it. There is an issue of erosion and further erosion, which is to be an operation and maintenance issue. And then the third one is there is a design issue as to the volume of water that body of water has to carry that is an engineering calculation. If South Florida Water Management District, I know what I'd like to do is get a meeting set up, Danny, Chris, and Mike, we go down, meet with them, show them these documents. If after seeing these documents, they are willing to give us a letter indicating that they are not going to come after us right after we accept it and issue us a non-compliance for this. And they tell us that they not. In other words, we now totally see the whole thing, not just what they furnished us, but we've seen everything, and we don't have a problem, then I'm happy.
Well, and I will say that Mr. Gephardt had contacted me, and I spoke with him early this afternoon before the meeting, and he had requested that we table this because he's out of town, and he wanted to get right on top of this as soon as he got back, which is next week, and I'd
And-
like to include him
I
if you're willing.
totally agree. I just want to give you the background because I think, I agree with the tabling. I think the next step is get South Florida. Now, there is always the chance that South Florida will come back and say, hey, wait, that's not what I thought
Don't go.
was certified.
But-
Well, no,
but-
here's why we do have to go there, Bill, because it gets complicated. I've never seen such a mess in my life. The issue is, where do you go? What do
Well,
you do?
And the question is, has anybody from South Florida Water Management actually had boots on the ground and looked at this thing?
We believe they were in a helicopter because we got the photos that they took. But that's
Probably
been
a
something,
drone.
look, hear me out. Here's the problem, yeah, private drone. Here's the issue that I've got concern on that, which to some is a good news issue. If they really saw this, and they did, I would have thought that we would have received a letter right now or by now saying, hey, you guys got a problem. And we haven't heard anything.
Well, somebody at I agree, somebody at South Florida Water Management, not a phone call, not an email, they need to they need to put on paper that their name is associated with.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree. So I would
So-
like to defer it, but again, I don't believe that has a thing to do, wearing the other hat, to do, as we discussed in the meeting, with Casella. Casella, I think, stands on its own, notwithstanding this issue. I'm willing to go along with, as long as Danny and Chris will indicate that all the other i's have been dotted and t's been crossed of what we're accepting, whether it be stormwater or utilities, and have this as a conditioned issue that we can't even determine whose this is.
Then why
Does this
don't we
fall-
just table the whole darn thing?
Well, I don't think that's
Too
fair,
big.
Bill, to the developer on the things that do pass, that are done right. This is a so totally different issue. The
That's
water and the
part
sewer
of
and the
it.
storm all work. This issue is separate. But so I don't have any problem with approving Casella for the work, as long as we have the confirmation from both the engineer and staff
I made a
that the work is done.
Kathy wants to make a
I
motion.
might make a motion to table to find out, until we get everything settled.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion to table Casella. You can come back to the next meeting after you've had a chance to have your meeting and you include Mr. Gephardt in it.
Motion to table is preferential motion, Madam
Yep.
Chairman.
And so I will call that question.
All, aye.
Aye.
Aye,
I respectfully disagree, but
okay.
it's, no,
No?
no, I don't agree,
3 to
but
1.
I understand where you're coming from.
And for what it's worth, I mean, again, it's fine, but respectively, fully rather, each one of these has a separate issue, and that's fine, and we need to address each issue, particularly legitimate ones, but I would at least like the board to remember, most of these turnovers that I'm coming to you before you on, have been submitted way back in 2016. I do this work all over in all kinds of districts, and these timeframes are incredible. Now, it's complicated, it's a big community, there's a lot going on, that's fine, and I don't wanna stand here and say we're not gonna fix legitimate things, but I would just ask, in a broader scheme, that we think about this, we're constantly tabling things, we've got a lot of committees going out there that aren't reporting to staff, but then we think we have the green light, and they come here with problems, so on and so forth. We ask that we keep that in mind so we can start moving some of these through, because we have been, from my perspective as a developer council, it is almost incredible the amount of time that it's been taking for some of these turnovers to occur. Some of this may be our fault, I believe not all of it is, but from here on, we would like to start to move these in a more normal fashion. And going along with that, if I could at this time, and maybe Mr. Pierce and I should talk about this separate, but I think he indicated he did not feel the package was sufficient, and this also goes to some confusion and perceived inconsistencies on our part as to the process for these turnovers from a legal documentation standpoint.
If we're gonna
And-
defer this, I wanna make sure that we understand what Tony has that is keeping him on this. I don't wanna go out and solve problem A and then have B come up and we wait
And-
another
and if
2
you
months.
will
Let's
get-
get it all on the table.
And just this week, Charles submitted a response to my last memo of July 11th, on Casella 1 and 2. I think I just got that yesterday or the day before. In my recollection, maybe last Friday. So that's just recent, and those will be addressed at the same time.
Are
And
these
if you will-
deal-breaking deals?
No, these are,
Are
these
these
are.
simple things?
Some people call them nits, but we can work them out.
Yeah, if the
Well,
two of you will
picking nits-
work.
Picking nits? is
Some
that
of them
what
are
you-
nits, yes, if we're
The
picking
two
it
I think
nits.
it's the other way around.
My concern with the Casella and Carina and this ridge that we have in the middle of our flowway is that if we accept one side and not the other, then the side that we don't accept is gonna say, hey, that's not my problem, that's the other guy's problem.
It
And
would
then
be if
we
it was
don't get
different,
anybody
two,
to take care
Margaret, it
of
would
it,
if
so.
it was 2 developers, but it's 1 developer.
I know it's
I think
one,
it would
but
play
it's-
out the same, however, and formally, our position is that it functions fine, our engineer's position, it functions fine. I think the question raised here, Water Management District went out there, let's just make sure, hopefully that's a meeting that can occur in short order, we can get on a new agenda.
Let's go on to the next item on the agenda. Very well put.
Thank you.
down, is that what
Thank you.
Margaret, one more thing for Charles while he was up there, that, just to make sure, I went through our, as you've asked, our design review manual, and I'm of the opinion that we have authority and we have powers in that manual to go outside water, sewer, irrigation, storm, drainage, and that is these other things that people have been talking about. What I would like to do is to make an official request. I would like to see the development order and the plans for the landscaping, the signage, the street lighting, and whatever design was done for these projects so that we wrap these things up. I don't want any more conditional approvals. I know the people don't want the conditional approvals. If we have plans that call for XYZ plants and all that, and somebody's far better at looking at them than I am, I wouldn't know a tree from a plant to begin with. But the issue is, if they were required as a part of the development order and/or permit, our design criteria manual says we do not accept it until we verified that. And our neat thing is, we need to know what we're approving, because we don't have this documentation. It's not like a set of plans for the water or the sewer, which we have. We're asking for something that you all prepared. We don't have it to check it, and
Can
we
we
need
move on,
that.
please?
And that's fair enough, and all
We
I'm
need
saying in
that.
return is if we did build it in
No, no,
according
no.
to that, it'd be accepted, so.
Yeah, if you can get those plans to us for
Yeah.
that stuff, I think Carina, Casella, and some of these other ones will go a lot quicker.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Thank you. We've got the we got the
Yeah, my-
P-PAC
Yeah, well, my point is
report.
that we want these documents.
And let it go, please, so we can move on.
don't understand.
P-PAC report,
No, you're fine. I
because we
understand.
could be here all night talking about this.
Right. Give us the
We
plan.
can't
Film
resolve
easy,
anything.
P-PAC.
Give us the plans, you're right.
You have our written report, and the only two kind of underlined issues, one of them we've already resolved, and that's the signs on Pelican Reserve Boulevard. But we are still we are very concerned about the conveyance of some of these areas where we've got all sorts of problems that have been outlined by Joe and by Jan Bierce earlier, that we don't think we should be accepting roadways where the curbs are chipped, the monuments are in bad shape, things that we're gonna have to expend a lot of money on. The CDD is gonna be ending up being charged to the residents of Pelican Preserve. And we don't think we should be accepting these until they correct them. Now, we've given Chris and Chris can comment on this, we've given Chris a report that has started to lay out what these things are. We've got photographs of them. A lot of work has been done. We still have more work to do. But we don't think we should have to accept something that isn't in reasonable condition.
Phil, here's what happens on these, which causes this, and it's just a problem here over and over and over. The typical project goes, it has a date of substantial completion. You've got to be done. And when you get done, then we do a punch list. And that punch list, you don't get paid final until it's done. Our problem is these things last forever getting done because they're phased. How many punch lists, I guess the question is, do you do? Because typically, all punch lists have to be done within a period of, say, 90 days of the issuance of a certificate of substantial completion. That sets off all kinds of clocks, a 1-year warranty. So any crack, any break, anything like that that occurs then in that next 3/4 of a year or 9 months, the developer or the contractor is responsible to fix those things. Our problem is that what is typically a year turns into 2, into 3, into 4. Then you get into these plant issues of dying and all the other and sundry things. Some of those cracks, I guess my first question were those caught in the first punch list? And if they weren't caught and they were there, then shame on us to, what, we have Stevie Wonder doing the punch list? I mean, we gotta have people that are checking this stuff out. My point is that from the contractor's perspective, what is the date that you stop and to say that this thing is substantially complete and you develop a punch list? And if it has all those items and all those items that the gentleman showed a while ago that was on that list were visible at the time we did our punch list, then shame on us for not catching all that stuff. But if they occurred later, then they fall in as warranty items, and I totally agree with you. It's the contractor and the developer's responsibility to come in and ask for a transfer.
Madam
If that gets
Chairman,
delayed,
I
then
know.
it's their problem.
I love Mr. Tinkle, but I'm getting tired of hearing him.
And
People need
we
to hear it,
haven't-
Bill.
We haven't accepted any of these things,
No.
so.
Well,
I
you
mean,
accepted one, Solero, but that's fine.
So, I mean, obviously, there's plenty of documentation here, and have you provided these,
We have provided
this
those.
to,
Oh, yes.
to Lennar?
Huh? Chris, I know you,
Provided it, I just got that today.
Okay,
yeah,
so,
Would
your
they need to be-
concerns will be addressed.
yeah.
Had we done a punch list, Chris? Had we done a punch list?
We haven't, Tetra Tech has, originally on their walkthrough, and some of the issues, probably the majority of them were not addressed in that punch list.
That weren't caught?
They weren't addressed on the punch list. The number of curves, if you look at the overall number that were reported compared to what they have now, that's over time, but it seems like vertical construction causes the issue.
Well, that's, we just can't continue doing that.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a
Can't
couple
do that.
hundred problems.
Do you have anything else for us?
No,
In those
unless you have
concerns?
questions of me
No.
about the report.
Anybody have any questions?
No, no.
No. Budget. Mr. Bloom, are you ready?
I am ready.
All right.
Especially the crack curve you got in.
Kathy's got 100 questions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We're sort of ready.
Okay, Stephen Bloom, Severn Trent. Before we get into any of the details on the budget, I wanted to provide kind of a quick overview of where we're at and a couple of the changes that are included in the package you have. This is our last meeting before the public hearing, which would be the next meeting at 5 o'clock. No action is required at the meeting today. It's just kind of a discussion on the budget, in particular centering on the capital projects that are included in the package. I did want to mention, though, that we have made some adjustments to the budget from our previous discussions, and I'll briefly highlight those. None of these are changes that have not been discussed already at prior meetings, but I did just want to mention them to you. Overall, the assessments and the per unit assessment amount is no different in this budget than in any of your prior versions. Meaning any changes we made with line items, meaning if we reduced one line item, something else was increased. So it's kept that part of it level. In particular, like the general fund, the net of everything we did was about $11,000. So I put that into the capital transfer line item at the bottom of the general fund. So that means that the assessment amount that you approved is the same per unit, per EAU assessment amount that you have in front of you. In terms of changes, we corrected the staffing rates for the couple employees that we had talked about at our first general fund meeting. I added notes in the staffing plan to show which positions are new. In terms of operational changes, we have reduced the dog park sod installation number down to 20,000. To offset, the littoral maintenance was increased to 25,000. As discussed, we flip-flopped the stormwater and wetland maintenance line item amounts.
That was Mr. Tinkle's suggestion, as I recall.
Yes,
Um,
and a good
as-
one.
Yeah, what we were going to do though is we were gonna check to find out what spiked that deal to begin with, because that's why I robbed it.
Oh, well, no.
Did
knew
we
why-
verify
We
that?
knew why it spiked. It was conveyances, and the original budget number way back was done before the contract was renegotiated. So that's why that number was all the way up at 124 versus what staff says it can be down to the 65.
So is the 65 available out of that to pull and put over there with the other 65 to make 130?
To,
In other words, we robbed it out of that other account.
we just flipped them. We didn't do any robbing.
We lowered, because we were trying to keep status quo, so we took it out of another line item. My question was, that other line item we took it out of, I thought was wetland maintenance.
Correct.
Are
Wetland
we in
maintenance-
trouble now in wetland maintenance because we took that out?
No, not to my knowledge. Staff was comfortable with the 65.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah. And then the storm water system maintenance was increased to the 124.
Okay.
Newsletter and website maintenance was increased to cover some of the potential newsletter plans, as well as to allow sufficient funding for the website for the additional maintenance. And those are the changes to the general fund. Pelican Preserve, no significant changes were made, with the exception that when the newsletter cost goes up, it's an allocated cost, so that means anything that gets allocated gets a piece of it. But that's it. The Pelican Preserve will provide some additional changes probably on, it's August 10th, I believe. So I'll have those changes prior to the public hearing. I'll get those changes implemented. I think the big push would be to reduce the assessments.
Yes, we are going to be reducing the numbers fairly substantially.
So we'll have a reduction, at least in Pelican Preserve, compared to what you have in front of you. Kind of moving forward a little bit more in my notes. I'm still working on gathering some information on the connection fee revenue. We had talked about that at the last meeting. And obviously, moving forward, we're gonna be working with staff to split out the general fund, the utility fund by service, and so that it's a much more detailed. Part of that will be coinciding with the rate reserve study that's gonna get done, because that's gotta be a big piece of it. Because we had talked about the connection revenue, and again, in order to really start splitting this out, you gotta know what money you need.
What is that number, Stephen?
2.5 since 2011.
$2.5
$5 million
million?
in connection revenue.
And it's setting in an undistributed account?
I'm not sure what you mean by undistributed.
Well, we haven't put it
Sitting-
into water, sewer,
it
and
has-
irrigation yet.
Correct. It is.
But it's setting somewhere as 2.5 million.
Absolutely, yes.
It-
Now, some of that's the revenue come in. Now, some of that could have been spent on projects. That's the part I'm still.
That was my question.
Yes, that's the piece.
What's the net?
That's the piece I'm still working on.
Okay,
Now, this is the enterprise fund?
yeah.
The enterprise fund, and that's actually, by the way, that's through July. I grabbed any new numbers to show.
Yeah, Bill, we've brought in $1,797 for each, about 800 ERCs. So whatever that number is, 17, 18.
Yeah, and those
that-
fees are split into 3 categories, and that's kind of what I want to
Correct.
grab.
But we needed nets, because it has been
Oh, yeah.
tagged.
And that, if you'll excuse me for a moment, that's part of the cash balance of the enterprise fund, is that so?
That is correct.
Thank you very much.
Now, and again, I just want to be clear, the 2.5 is what's come in the door.
Right, I understand.
I don't want
We
anybody
don't
to
know
assume
what's
that.
gone out.
Yes, I mean,
You will be able to
Oh,
tell
yes.
what went out?
I will.
Good.
I'm
Because
lining up.
that's gotta come off the 3 accounts. So if we robbed a ton of that cash out, for let's just say water,
Yeah.
then the money that's divvies to water,
Right.
it comes out of that. Okay, good.
Now, I have done, and this was part of our discussion, I have done some overall review of the utility fund and the cash that's there. Again, we don't know what the net number of the connection fees.
Oh,
But
I will have that for you, probably tomorrow.
But I can tell you right now that through June, because I ended it at June, when you take out all of the reserves, liabilities, and all the other fun stuff, assuming, some projections for the rest of this year, it's about $3 million in net available cash.
With the enterprise fund.
In the enterprise fund. Now, that does not include some reserves. For example, there is a little bit over $500,000 in a trust account called Rate Stabilization Fund, which is what it sounds like. It's for rates. It was established per the bond indentures. There's about $300,000 in a capital and maintenance reserve. Same thing in the trust account. Again, these are things that have been established over the years through your bond documents.
And we can't touch those because
Well, you can touch them for certain specific things. Right now, we're classifying them as reserve.
But they're not delineated to any one of the three accounts.
Correct.
And that
Nothing,
needs-
nothing in general, the
I
utility fund
understand,
has always
but
been
that needs to
one.
be done.
Sure. So that's kind of a big picture of where you are, because we had talked about trying to figure out, making sure we were comfortable where your cash is at. So that basically, by year end, I'm estimating about $3 million.
Mr. Guy?
Madam Chairman, thank you. Steve, my perception of a budget, especially one that doesn't begin for several months and then 12 months after that, is that the budget is as much a political document as it is a financial document, in that the board, in this case, is telling its residents its best idea of how the funds that are being raised through the assessment should be spent. When I looked, I don't have it in front of me, I can grab it if I have to. When I looked at the enterprise fund earlier, I noticed that the documents were telling us that we were gonna have to take $1 million out of surplus to finance the enterprise fund. And I think we had this conversation, but if not, I think that is misleading, in that a good portion of that was for the enlargement and improvement of this building and or the Girl Scout building. Now, if that building, the Girl Scout building, is purchased this year and we have appropriation and budget for it this year, then it's not going to be needed in fiscal 18, correct?
Okay.
Well, just-
You
where to
lost me
start?
on that one.
Just bear
Can
me,
you put
just
that
bear,
one in English?
Yeah, just
First
bear
of all,
with me for.
I like to call the budget a communication document, not a political document.
Not-
But anyways, the $1 million that you're talking about would be to fund capital projects, not to fund any operations within the utility fund.
Correct.
So that meaning if the board at the end of the day agrees to all the projects that are in that document, we would have to find that money, $1 million, to support those projects.
I respectfully disagree. Because if we're successful in purchasing that Girl Scout building this year out of fiscal 17, where we have budget, that million is gonna go down by 600,000 in fiscal 18, and we're not gonna need that $1 million.
The only money that's in 18 is to renovate the building. The purchase of the building is in 17. It's projected to be spent in 17.
Correct.
So the only piece that I have in the budget for 18, which is for the utility fund, is 385,000, is to renovate it if the purchase goes through.
Well, I'm gonna have to look at my numbers again, because I had a different impression, so please continue while I dig.
Well,
Mr. King?
and it's, starts on
Everything.
page, 194.
Oh,
If you wanna look at
okay.
the, you can see the $1 million.
Where, what
That-
page are you?
It's agenda page 194.
Can you scroll that, Chris?
And while you're working on your numbers, may I move to Mrs. Flaherty?
I certainly wish you would.
Mrs. Flaherty, I know you have questions.
Gee. I wanna make a motion though first. I'd like to get rid of the dog wash station out of the, budget.
I'll second that if that's a motion.
Yes, it is a motion.
I'm happy with that. I'll call that, do you have any concerns about removing the dog wash station out of the budget?
I thought we put it in the last week, 2
No,
weeks ago.
No, it was in already.
It was in already?
Yeah.
We just deferred it? Okay.
Yeah,
See, I thought we
So,
put it in. I was thinking, why are we
I'll
taking
call
it out?
that question.
Aye.
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 I guess when you say approval, it's for purposes of Stephen coming back with a revised budget,
Yes.
final budget hearing.
Yes.
Correct.
Because the final action isn't being taken.
Right,
tonight.
yeah, so your next
Right.
version will have
Proposed.
the dog wash budget taken out.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Here,
Mrs. Flaherty,
yeah,
next.
okay. Now, the one on page 195, where it says the dog park wash station and drinking fountain, is that just for the drinking fountain? I don't mind, that drinking fountain stay in. I'm just asking, page 195. Or page.
It doesn't differentiate them on a budget.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's, so,
If you take it out, you're taking both out.
okay,
I don't know what the, I don't know what the split is
Okay.
off the top of my head between the two.
I just took
I-
the.
If you want, we can get back with staff and find out how much of the 5,000 is related to the
The one
the
fountain?
wash station and then pull that piece out.
Okay. Well, no, it's it's in the general fund, it's 20,000.
Let's be, okay, I think we're gonna have to clear something then.
Okay,
The 5,000 is in the capital project fund for the general fund. There are other, operating expenses in the general fund related to the dog park.
okay, yes, and under there it's the dog wash station and replacement canopy, but I wanna get, is first 20,000.
Okay, so that would have to be an additional agreement by the board to pull that out as well.
Okay.
Again, unless that was the original intent of the
That was,
motion.
yeah, that was the intent, was to just get rid of the dog wash station totally out of the budget.
But Lee, you want a motion to leave the drinking fountain?
Yeah, I mean, the drinking fountain, we can look into. I mean, most people bring their own water bottle, but,
You're making a motion.
yeah, we can leave the drinking fountain in. A motion that we leave the drinking fountain in, but take out the dog wash park and the canopy.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Okay.
Are we voting?
I'm looking for, where's the canopy? What,
Page 165. It says replacement canopy. We don't have a canopy, so that's why
You go to 165, Chris.
agenda, it's, yeah, agenda page 165.
okay.
I think you have to go higher up. There you go.
There it is, see it?
Mhm. So you wanna take the 20,000 out for
I
the
do.
dog wash station and the replacement canopy?
Yes.
That's your motion?
Right.
And Mr. Guy, that's your second?
That is my second.
Okay, I will call that question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. No one's opposed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, I'm going to the fire hydrants. I know that they have to be replaced, and I have looked.
Page, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, page 194. I know that, that I was told the maintenance was not done by, the fire department. However, I read that it's supposed to be done by the fire department. But, when we replace, how many do you plan to replace for the 70,000?
We have a,
No, they're not. I've looked them up. They range from 1,500 to 3,000.
we have a lot of fire hydrants
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
are
oh, I-
bad.
Okay, but my concern is that, there's certain companies that guarantee the fire hydrants for 100 years, and those are, you're looking at me, I got the proof in my.
No, I'm with you, I'm with you.
And I wanna make sure that, and those are from 1,500 to 3,000, I wanna make sure that we get the ones that are going to last and not break.
Are you
Sure,
wanting
fine.
to change the budget in any way?
Well, that's why I wanna know how many they plan for the 70,000, that's.
Well,
As
and
many
the-
as we can get.
Right, and the issue with that is not so much the cost of the hydrant itself, is basically the plumbing on those hydrants are not valved.
restrained.
It's
Right.
not just pulling the hydrant off, we actually have to dig down
Right.
and change all the fittings, which is as expensive as the hydrant itself.
Correct.
And that's typically the older hydrants on Gateway Boulevard,
Okay.
which are the
that's-
ones that are the oldest, that are falling apart, we can't get parts for them to go in and replace them anymore.
What are you looking at, Kenny, about 5,000 each on those?
It will vary, depending on what they, a lot of that is based on what they found when they got down to the.
Average.
So we're gonna
Yeah.
leave that line item alone.
Yeah, so that explains it better, that we're not only replacing them, but we have to replace. Thank you.
So,
I'd say
Nick?
5,500 is what we looked at, the average cost.
So
Okay.
12 or 13 max.
So,
We're just doing the capital fund, right?
More than
That's-
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, going to page 192. This is my last question.
All right.
All right. I'm looking at the concession stand renovation and the bathroom renovation for the park, okay? Has this been, did you get some kind of idea if that's how much it's gonna cost?
Yes, we had
Or
con-
just figuring,
We had an engineering evaluation.
So,
And
okay.
a consultant's report.
all right. Thank you.
And that storage building with the pool. that's
Yeah.
one that we could probably jettison that.
No?
No.
Okay, so I'm gonna, no, do that, huh? The storage building at the pool, at 20,000? I'm sorry, I was just brought to my attention.
You're requesting that be done?
It's an item that they wanted it for some storing paint and pressure washer and that, and a lot of that maintenance, we won't store it over that, we'll keep it over here and send someone over to do that work versus keeping it at the pool.
So-
And the pool staff typically doesn't do a lot of that maintenance,
So
it's our
you're,
folks.
so you're requesting that we remove that 20 grand
I
from?
think it can be sacrificed.
Yes.
Okay.
So I motion to remove the $20,000 from the storage building for the swimming pool.
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. No one's opposed.
Okay, I'm finished.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Guy, back to you.
Thank you very much, but I give my time to somebody else. Mrs. Flaherty has taken care of my issues very nicely. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Tinkle?
Only thing is, you and Mike and Kenny gone through everything and all the things that we have discussed. You're covered?
It's a solid year's worth of work for our team.
Good.
We'll be busy.
No other questions?
But we will spend the money.
I didn't have anything. I just want to thank you, Stephen, for providing us with a budget that we can understand and really sink our teeth into this year. And I want to thank staff. Please convey this to Mike and Kenny and yourself, Chris, that I appreciate the efforts that you've gone through to save the district money, which you don't really get a lot of accolades for that. But I know that when we've discussed them, you're really looking at the contracts and making sure we're getting our money's worth, and I appreciate that.
I think I would like to, credit the staff on the utility side, some of the efficiencies that we're coming up with, the public works side. Even the other day, we were looking at the dumpsters, and We aren't using them during the summer. Why are they coming twice a week? And our monthly bill was $1,000.
Oh, it's expensive.
And we looked it up, and we've dropped that, we've gone to just a little smaller recycling containers, and the once a week when no one's over there, to $400 a month.
Yep.
We also dropped the Cardinal contract that was $550 a month, even though we have some sampling, we'll be doing that in-house, and we'll also be taking over some other sampling in-house that engineering firms are doing now at a higher hourly rate.
And I just wanna say thank you for that, because that makes a huge difference for us.
Marty,
And the
question.
more we do that, the better off we are.
Question for Stephen. Just the logistics of how this works, but we're gonna be retaining a financial advisor, great consultant, for the enterprise fund.
Right.
They come in and let's just say that they, relative to the capital, they find the need to make significant changes. That doesn't impact this budget because it's based on the rates and charges of those three utilities. Do we go back and let's say they add $300,000, $400,000, $500,000? Do we just go back and adjust the budget and then let the rates reflect that through the revenue? Is that all it is?
Yeah, that's what you're gonna do. You're gonna wanna adjust your budget. And then, I mean, again, you do have rates that will be effective as of January 1, 2018, so you got another round that'll
And-
cover that.
And along with that, do we have a definitive letter from Lee County Utilities on both our water and wastewater rates? When's we know they change in October. Do we have what they're going to change it to in October yet?
No, we have not received that yet.
We've not received it. Are they going to, since we would like to do usually these utility rate studies for 2-3 years, are they going to give us a multiple year projection? Have they done that in the past?
They have not done that in the past.
It's
but
not
we said we
unreasonable for
haven't
us to
seen
ask
it.
for that.
But there's been usually, and again, maybe Chris may be better, but usually there's a discussion with them as a part of the rate study.
We'll be meeting with the utility director and also the finance staff in the next 2 weeks to discuss our rate case and also those projected increases and how they're gonna impact the utility budget.
Our rate case, you mean our own internal rates?
Right.
And they're a major portion of it because we gotta pay them for water and sewer.
Correct, and the true up, so we'll be addressing all those issues with them so they can be folded into the consultant's scope.
Oh, but do we have the fees budgeted here for the rate consultant?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
It's $25,000 in here. Let me double check that.
That might be a little low.
Well, we've prepared internally almost 50% of that work that the consultants typically ask for, so instead of paying them to come in and look through our books or asking us to regurgitate it, we'll be
Yes.
handing them over all the data they're required to do, so we're gonna save a considerable
I
amount
realize
of the
Chuck's
fee.
putting a lot of that background together, which would reduce the level of effort they have to do.
The number's actually $50K, $50,000 for
That's
rate
fine.
studies in
Okay.
here. And
Great.
to your other point, we do put in contingencies in the budget for rate increases that we're not sure of right now. So your wastewater
Okay.
already has some in here, just in case.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay. That brings us, thank you,
Thank you.
thank you, Stephen. That brings us to supervisor comments. Mrs. Flaherty?
I just have one question. How are we in hiring someone to replace April?
It's advertised. We have 31 resumes at this point, and we'll start interviewing people next week.
Thank you. Mr. Guy?
Once again, I want to compliment the board on working through some very difficult issues today in a collegial way.
Mr. Tinkle?
Yeah, I'm putting together, reviewing the old files, trying to come up with, to get to Danny and to Chris and to Mike, a listing of our next round of candidates for storm sewer rehabilitation. With these rains that we've had, and I don't know what it's like outside Gateway Greens, I haven't gone to a lot of the communities, but these catch basins I know are plugged, and we're gonna have to get in and get them cleaned, because we're getting water backed up over the streets, curb to curb. So.
These are the ones that take water from the streets and the driveways and
Go
down
into
into
the
the
lakes.
ponds, is that so?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all I had.
And I don't have anything except for just to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
All right, we are adjourned. And the time is
Yeah,
6:20.
make sure that's on for Kevin.
Maryland, if you get that, Maryland, yes.
You own that?